Winston Churchill was someone who could speak on any subject at any time. One day, some people tried to trip him up with a controversial subject, sex. He stood up and said, "Gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure." Then he sat back down. Sex can be very fun and pleasurable, but it is only good and pure within the enclosure of marriage. Join me today as we take a quick look at the Proverbs and learn how dangerous sexual temptations can really be. Read with me Proverbs chapter 5, verse 1 through 6. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Turn your ear to my words of insight, that you may maintain discretion, and your lips may preserve knowledge. For the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her paths wander aimlessly, but she does not know it. Although times and people change, moral absolutes do not. What was morally wrong in Solomon's day is morally wrong in our day today. That's why it is always good advice to run from sexual temptation. One of the best examples that I can think of in the Bible about running from sexual temptation is the story of Joseph in Genesis chapter 39. I encourage you to reread that story as a good example of what to do when sexual temptation comes at you. But in our verses in Proverbs today, Solomon continues to plead with his son to listen to his advice. The Hebrew word for pay attention means to raise up your ears, and the word for turn your ears means to stretch them out toward something. Kind of like a dog or a horse would raise their ears to a sudden sound of warning. We need to lift our ears to hear this wisdom from Solomon, so that, as it says, you may maintain discretion and your lips may preserve knowledge. Solomon is instructing his son to carry a mouthful of knowledge with him at all times. Wouldn't it be nice to always know what to say and how to handle every tempting situation you encounter? That is one of the reasons why David wrote Psalm 119:11. I have hidden your word in my heart, that I might not sin against you. But in order to flee the temptation, we should also know a little bit about how temptations work and what their end result probably is. Solomon warns about the enticing ways of the seductress and the painful end of the illicit act of adultery. James, the brother of Jesus, explains what happens when temptation gets the best of us. James chapter 1 verse 14 says, "But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death." Solomon mentions two primary enticements and two painful results of giving into those enticements. The first enticement from the adulterous person is lips that drip like honey. Honey was probably one of the sweetest substances known in ancient Israel. And the words spoken from a temptress are some of the sweetest words that you might ever hear. If you are not prepared, if you are in a vulnerable state, then you need to be careful when seduction crosses your path. Your first reaction needs to be shrewd and pre-planned. You can't wait till you're in the heat of the moment to decide what to do, because by then it's too late. Joseph saved his life by being prepared to resist the seductive lips of Potiphar's wife. He had already made up his mind. Listen to his response to her proposition. "No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? The second enticement is speech that is as smooth as oil. Not only is a seductress a sweet talker, but a smooth talker too. Olive oil was one of the smoothest substances known to ancient Israel, and oil is a lubricant that reduces friction. The tempter will come up with any answer to every objection in order to smooth things out and to get us to give in. One commentator talked about the seductress this way: she soothes, smooths, and softens every moral objection that may arise in opposition to her evil plan. Solomon then gives two painful results of giving in to sexual enticements. The first, what seemed so sweet turns out to be so very bitter. The sweet taste of sexual sin quickly turns noxious and poisonous to the one participating in it. Secondly, the smooth as oil speech of the tempter will become a sharp, piercing, double-edged sword. Notice that it's a double-edged sword that causes more damage than a single-edged sword, because it slices two ways instead of just one. And lastly, Solomon tells us that an adulterous person wanders aimlessly, but eventually their path ends in death and the grave. The feet of the seductress might seem to lead to a bedroom of lustful pleasures, but they're actually headed toward death and destruction. What might seem like the highway to heaven is actually the roadway to hell. Also, the more someone gets involved in that way of life, the more they become unaware of the destructive path that they are on. But God's Word, it instructs us to consider our ways carefully. Proverbs 4:26 says, "Give careful thought to the paths for your feet, and be steadfast in all your ways." Psalm 119:59 says, "I have considered my ways, and have turned my steps to your statutes." In Proverbs 11:19, "Truly the righteous attain life, but whoever pursues evil finds death." Learn to pursue the pathways of righteousness and avoid the ways of ungodly sexual behavior. God will help you to succeed through His Word, and He wants to give you righteous and eternal pleasures that are not destructive. Let me leave you with this promise from God's Word if we will choose godly paths. Psalm 16:11, "You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand."